Brian Hite, fascinating man, stuntman, author, public speaker, deep thinker. I start the conversation off with just motivation. I wonder what you think about motivation. Where do you have it? Is it science? Is it art? Also, we talk about potential. It's a very interesting philosophy on potential. What is it? Does it change all the time? Also, pressure. Is pressure completely self-made? Is it really there? Like I said, he's a stunt man. He talks about these stunts working on these TV shows and what he had to do and how he kind of fell in love with it and how it branched out to these other areas. He has this Pressure X system or this program where he talks about that. He did time spoke to the Army, to the soldiers of the Army, understanding how to perform under pressure. Like I said, he's an author as well. He wrote this book, Begin Again, where he blends Eastern and Western ideologies. I would think is a difficult task. He does not. But it's a fascinating discussion with Brian, just well-rounded, well thought. His view on discipline is very, very interesting. But I enjoyed my discussion with Brian. I look forward to eventually meeting him face to face. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because I was working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word, discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission? How do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Talk to you, Brian Hite. Thank you so much for your time. Why is motivation a science and not an art?
Motivation, a science rather than an art. Well, I mean, because there are predictable ways that we can influence it. In terms of levels of motivation, there are three things that we can do that influence motivation. One is the extent to which, and it's not so much what we do, but just things that influence motivation. The first is the extent to which we believe that we're capable of successfully doing whatever it is that we're talking about being motivated to do. For example, if I don't think I can successfully do something, if I think I'm going to fail at it and fall on my face, then I'm probably not going to be very motivated to do it. The second thing is the extent to which we care about whatever it is that we're trying to be motivated to do. If I don't care about it, if it doesn't matter to me, if I see no value in it, then again, I'm not going to be motivated. And the third thing is the extent to which we believe that the benefits outweigh the costs of engaging in the behavior. So, if I think that, and what I mean by costs, it could be costs in terms of time or energy or just emotional exhaustion. I mean, or in terms of actual money, whatever it is. But if the benefits don't outweigh the cost in our mind, if we don't believe that they do, then we're not likely to be motivated. So those are three things that when we're looking at motivation, both in ourselves and with others, if we're leaders, it does a lot of good for us to examine motivation through those lenses, because it allows us to ask the right questions. For example, when I was working with the Army, one of the things that I would ask at the beginning of sessions with leaders was, what's the biggest challenge that you face as leaders? And motivation would come up more times than not. And the way that they would frame that problem was this. Again, more often than not every time, but more often than not, they would frame it like this. How do I get my people to care about what it is that's going on? How do I get them to do what they're supposed to do because it's the right thing to do, because they see the importance of it, they understand it, and then they'll just do it? And that's fine as far as it goes, but what it assumes is just one of those three influencers of motivation. The second one that I said, the caring about it. They assume that if they see a lack of motivation in somebody, that it's the result of that person not caring. And it might be, but it may also be that that person cares very deeply and would love to do great. They just don't think they can. Or they do think that they could do well and they care about it. They see the importance of it, but the cost of what it would take from them to do that thing just is more than they're willing to give right now. So those could be some other things. So it allows leaders in particular, but us too as individuals, to ask better questions and to pursue motivation through more targeted lenses than we typically do.
Hmm. Is your approach, I mean, you're a stuntman, you're so many things, Brian, but is your general approach in life more science than art?
What do you mean by art?
Very good. So science. So I played golf this morning. At 150 yards, I used a particular iron, but there's wind. There's a lie. There's what I just shot. There's what I had for breakfast. So it gives me a certain foundation, and then I use my gut to make the decision. So I would say it's in that case 60% science, 40% art.
Okay. So, well, what I just heard is that you knew what some of the variables were in the equation and were able to take them into consideration, whereas you didn't know other variables and you just had to guess. There's a concept in
Hmm.
philosophy called Laplace's demon, where it's this thought experiment where Laplace's demon has access to all knowledge, knows where every particle is in the universe, the spin, the trajectory, where all the variables are, and all the information. And the idea is that if you have that information, then you could predict the future, however far out you want to go, because you have all the information. So what I heard from you right there is it's we call it science if we know the variables and we take them systematically into account, but it's art when we just guess based on our past experiences or whatever it is that we're basing it on. Maybe where the moon is in the sky. I don't know, but
But
that's
how about just a gut feeling? How
yeah,
about just
yeah,
a
yeah. Some of and we yeah, and it maybe some sort of hunch that's coming from some deep experience that maybe just isn't making it into our consciousness, or it might be gas. Who
hmm,
knows? But
hmm.
whatever it is, we're going to act on that feeling. So yeah, um, yeah. So I don't know what the balance is of science to art or anything else. I do like to systematically approach situations, and I think that that's one of the things that gets brought up sometimes when people talk about stunts and me being a stuntman and what that's like. And one of the assumptions that's out there is that stunt people are crazy, that we
Hmm.
just go willy-nilly into whatever and just throw ourselves into whatever's happening. And that's so far from the case. and,
Hmm.
and I'm not saying there aren't some guys who do that from time to time, but usually they weed themselves out pretty quickly, either because
Hmm.
they get hurt or stunt coordinators start to realize that they're just loose cannons and they don't want them on set because they're just dangerous. They put themselves and everybody else at risk. So I do approach life very much like I approach stunts, from a systematic perspective of, okay, what do I know right now? What is the information that I have available to me? What does that mean as far as I can interpret it in any kind of accurate way? And then based on that information, what's the right way forward? And like you said, with the God, I never have all the information, and I know I don't
Right.
have all the information. When we're making decisions, we just have to make the best decision we can given the information we currently have. And that's an interesting point too, because when people talk about, when they reflect back on, that was a horrible decision or that was a bad decision,
Hmm.
I a lot of times they I don't remember the exact name of the bias, but it's outcome bias, I think it's sometimes called. They judge whether their decision was a good decision or a bad decision based on the outcome.
Hmm.
And that's a bad way to decide whether our decisions are good or bad, because I could make a horrible decision. I could misevaluate all the information that's available to me, completely misunderstand it, make a decision to move forward. And just because of luck, because that's how life works, there are a lot of things that, whatever, things turn out okay. And then I think to myself, well, that was a great decision that I just made. Or I can, again, thoroughly analyze all of the information that I have, talk to all the people who should know, and then make an informed decision that works out badly, because sometimes that happens. And I
Hmm.
can think to myself, wow, that was a horrible decision. When in reality, it was really a great decision, and just something went wrong in that
Hmm.
situation. There's a guy named Nate Silver. He wrote a book called On the Edge, and he's the founder of statistical political, I don't know what you call it, the political analysis
Oh,
place
yes.
538.
Yes. Yes.
He was a former poker player, and so he's big in the well, he's still a poker player, but he was a professional poker player for a while. And he talks about that in that book of just, if you're a poker player, you're playing statistics. You understand what the hands are like, and you understand that there's a probability at there, and you make the decision based on the probability. But if it's 70-30, I'm going to take the 70% choice, but there's still a 30% chance that it may
Mm,
not work out the way that I
mm,
want it to.
mm.
Was it a bad decision? I don't think so. So, and I believe that all of life is a probability. I don't think that there are any certainties. So the best we can do is the best we can do, and move forward with the probabilities as we understand them and as we perceive them, and judge decisions based on what we knew at the time rather than what the outcome of that decision was.
So you were on VIP with Pam Anderson, The Righteous Gemstones, one of my favorite shows. I mean, were you ever faced with a stunt, Brian, that everything seemed checklist was set, but you just had a gut feeling that it was something wasn't quite right?
um, no, I don't remember any gut feeling that something wasn't right. Unless it just flat out wasn't right. And there
Right.
were times when that was the case. I remember being on a show called Numbers, and I was doubling a guy, and I was running. This is actually when people ask me what was the scariest thing you ever did. This is it. And it doesn't sound like that big a deal, but it was what you're talking about, because what the stunt was sounds pretty easy. I'm just running across a roof, and then I jump up on this ledge that's maybe, I don't know, 1.5 feet high, 1.5 feet wide. It's not a huge jump, and there's a pretty good platform to land on. But on the other side of that ledge was a 50-foot drop to the concrete, and I
Ooh,
was attached to nothing. So if I'd
ooh,
caught a toe, if I lost my balance, if I went, just sometimes things happen. And if it had, you and I wouldn't be sitting here having this
wow.
conversation.
Wow.
So prior to that stunt happening, again, I knew it wasn't that big a deal. I could certainly run across the roof and jump on the thing, but but it was also set up badly. And I knew that it was set up badly, and that there were more risks there than there should have been
Hmm.
given that circumstance. In other words, what could have happened, what should have happened, is that I should have been in a harness, and there should have been a wire attached to me that was tied off to something where if I caught a toe or went, I wasn't going to fall to my death, and it would have been an easy thing to hide. It wouldn't have been a hard thing to set up, but that's not what happened. Another time was I was
Wow.
on, what was that show? It was Hawaii Five-0, and there was a huge sequence where, I mean, cars were crashing, motorcycles were wrecking, of which I was supposed to be one. Big bus or some kind of truck was supposed to flip. Big sequence, all happening at once. And the motorcycle that I was on, it wasn't working. Through the rehearsals, it kept stalling. It wouldn't run right. And that's what you don't want in
Wow.
situations like what I'm saying, because once you get to the point of no return, you're going, and it's either going to work out or it's not going to work out. And so that was in my mind, and I could feel it. I could feel it inside me for sure, leading up to when they called action. Now, it turns out when they called action, the motorcycle just conked out. I hit the gas and it just stalled, and I couldn't get it started. And then I'd passed that point of no return where even if it had started, I still couldn't go because I was just too far out of position. So I didn't. But and who knows? That may have been a great thing, because the motorcycle
Mm.
could have died right in the middle of the whole thing, and I'd have been in the wrong spot and had some explosion go off next to me that shouldn't have. So who knows how that is? I may have been living these however many years it's been upset about that whole thing when I should have been grateful for it. Who knows?
Mm. Yeah. You described your first kind of indulgence. You were at Rutgers and you went down to New Jersey there, to Six Flags. I think it was the Batman ride, and you couldn't believe people getting paid to do this, and it sparked a whole initiative for you.
Yeah, it was the Batman stunt show at the Six Flags in New Jersey. I'd spent 2 years of college floundering, trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, trying to figure out where I fit in this work world, and I hadn't been able to figure it out. And then, just again, by chance, I happened to know the guy who was the company manager of the Batman stunt show at the Six Flags in New Jersey, where Rutgers is, and I got in to see the show, and it was immediate. I mean, the show started and there was this huge explosion and motorcycles come jumping out of this thing. And I, that was it. I was hooked. I had found right then, I was mesmerized. I didn't know it in that moment because I was so captivated, but But after that experience, that was it. That was the moment when I recognized where I belonged and what I wanted to do. And luckily, I was able to go backstage and talk to the people and ask them the question that I've been asked, I don't know, thousands of times since. How do you get to be a stuntman?
Mm.
How does one get this job? And their answer in that particular situation was, you need to know how to do fights, high falls, and motorcycles. So one of the people from the show taught me how to do fights and taught me how to do high falls. And I went and bought a dirt bike and just practiced that myself to get at least halfway proficient. I wasn't good by any stretch of the imagination, but I was good enough to get hired as an alternate. And then the second day of rehearsals, the guy who was full time, or one of them, there were two, got hurt. He was out for the season. So then I got bumped up, and then through that summer, I got way, way better because I was able to go out between shows and practice, and I had
Mm.
access to all this stuff that was, for me, a big playground.
Hmm.
I mean, it was a job, it was work, and it was a big playground, and it was just a lot of fun. And I found my place. That was the most fun I'd ever had in my life. It was the best summer I'd ever spent,
Wow.
and the clarity that I felt after that, when I made that decision, this is what I want to do, was it released so much anxiety
Hmm.
because I was starting to get stressed out. I was starting my junior year of college with, again, no idea what even direction to go to try to
Mm.
pursue a job afterward. Well, then I found this, and there you go. I was off and running.
Hmm. And then through many different, you were going to come to Florida. Somebody told you to go to Los Angeles, and bunch of things happened there. But tell me about working with the U.S. Army and the soldiers, about performing under pressure. You have a very interesting philosophy of pressure. What pressure is.
Yeah, the army thing, life does what it does. I
Yeah.
thought that I was going to do stunts forever, and then I ended up getting married, and that came along with a stepdaughter. And stunts is volatile. It's uncertain. You
Mm.
never know when you're going to work, or for how long you're going to work, or where you're going to work, how much money you're going to make. So with a family, I mean, when I was single, that was fine, but with a family, it was a lot harder. And so I was looking for a full-time job, and I put a resume out on whatever the different platforms were at that time. Monster, I think, was one of them, but
Oh yeah.
just basically asking the question, all right, so what kind of jobs are available for somebody who has a master's degree in sports psychology and no experience doing anything but falling down for a living?
Mm.
And it turns out you can work for the Army if that's what your background is, in this particular program. So they hired me to be a sport performance psychology consultant for the Army. And at the time, this was 2007. At the time, it was a brand new program, and they were focusing solely on traditional sport performance psychology, meaning that the program was designed to target specific performances like shooting or physical fitness or clearing buildings or finding IEDs or medical tasks. Whatever it is, there was a specific performance, and we were brought in to help the soldiers create the mental state necessary in order for them to be at their best in that particular moment. And that's really what the job was. And that was fine as far as it went. And I learned a lot, and I got to see a lot of stuff and work with some cool people in a lot of cool places. But that didn't, I don't know, that job, I ended up getting a divorce, and then I ended up going back to LA and doing stunts again for another 4 or 5 years full time.
Mm.
And then life changed again. Another wife came around. That also came with a stepdaughter, and my daughter, who's now 11. She was born. And that's when I started working for the Army again at Fort Campbell, this time in Nashville, which is where I'm originally from. So I'd come full circle. Nashville is where I live now too. I made it back home. But now the program was different. It was about, there was still the performance piece of it, the way I just described earlier, but they had added a resilience component that, to me, was really important. To me,
Hmm.
it really, especially at that point in my life. I mean, when I first started working at Fort Campbell, obviously I was married, like I just told you. That didn't last very long, and it was about 3 years in when I was divorced. And so the point in my life when I really gravitated toward that resilience program, and that's where my focus was, it's where my research was, it's where my teaching was, it was really fortuitous for me that that's what happened. It was just, my place in life at that point really fit that material. And the difference in the material wasn't conceptual or theoretical or even some of the content in terms of specific skills, but the intent was different in the sense that with the performance program, it was around improving people's performance at a specific thing. Whereas the resilience training was about how do we provide people with resources and tools that they can use regardless of where they find themselves when the
Hmm.
challenges of life hit, which they will. They're inevitable, they're unavoidable. We're going to have those challenges. So when they come, are we are we equipped to deal with them as well as we can? And that's what the resilience program was about. And I really loved that. Now, your question was about pressure, and along the way, both in the performance program and in the resilience program, pressure was one of those things that was brought up regularly. So in the performance, it was okay. So we how do we get these guys to perform well under pressure? We got a lot of stress. The consequences are really are important. The stakes are really high. How do we help ensure that they do well, in these pressure environments? And in the resilience side, pressure came up a little bit differently. It was more feeling pressured to move up in rank, or feeling pressured to play a certain role as a spouse or a parent
Hmm.
or within the organization. Like there was different types of pressure that came up. People felt pressured to behave in certain ways, or and really uh, or to not have things affect them in certain ways, and etc. So pressure was involved in both. So this is something from my experience as a stuntman, my experience in the sport performance psychology world, and my experience with the resilience world. This concept of pressure has been ubiquitous throughout. But it wasn't until fairly recently that I really started putting some thought into it. I'd just kind of gone along with what seems to be the prevailing assumption that pressure is real, it's inevitable. There are certain situations that are going to create pressure. And so, what we need to do is figure out how to perform well in those pressure situations. That was just the assumption. That's what I was going on. But as I started to think about it more, I realized I don't think that's true. First, I don't think that there is such a thing as a pressure situation.
Hmm.
And I mean, this isn't even just new. This goes back to Stoic philosophers back in the day. I mean, Marcus Aurelius talked about it. Another Stoic philosopher, Epictetus, talked about it. It's not events that cause problems. It's our interpretation of those events. It's our judgment about those events that causes the problems. And so it's not the situations that we find ourselves in that cause pressure. It's our interpretation of those
Mm.
situations, where our
Mm.
attention is and how we perceive that circumstance that causes pressure. So from that standpoint, pressure is absolutely, it's not inevitable. We don't have to experience it. And there is no such thing as a pressure situation. And just, as I was thinking about this,
Hmm.
a couple of examples came to my mind just from my own work. uh, you mentioned VIP was one of the shows that I worked on. Well, one of the stunts that I did on that show was I was in the back of like a U-Haul truck. We were driving down the road about 15 miles an hour. And my job was to come out the back of the truck like I'd been thrown, hit the ground and roll and get up and walk away. Well, before that stunt, I was experiencing a huge amount of pressure. There
Oh.
was a lot. I was relatively new in my career. The stunt coordinator had brought me in. I didn't want to make him look bad. I knew if I screwed up that he would. There were a lot of influential, high level stunt people on set that day too, who were just, one of them was driving the truck, but the others were just standing there watching me. And I mean, people who run the big shows. So if I screw up, again, more thoughts in my head. If I screw up, these guys are never going to hire me. They're going to say bad things about me. I'm going to have a bad reputation. Everybody's going to think I'm bad. These are the types of things that were going through my mind. And just the stunt itself was awkward. It's driving one direction at 15 miles an hour, coming out the back of it at less than 15 miles an hour. But because of the physics of the whole thing, this is where special relativity comes in with Einstein, is, as I'm moving 15 miles an hour this way at a steady speed, I don't feel like I'm moving at all.
Right.
And so when I jump, it feels like I'm actually jumping this other direction, whereas in reality, my body is still moving the direction the truck is traveling. And people have screwed that up before. So this is one of those things where we were talking at the beginning about systematic approach to things. I went over that in my mind over and over and over again. How do I need to come out of this truck so that when I do get sucked back the direction the truck's going, my body will roll in the way that it needs to. So in addition to all the other worries, I'm also worried about getting hurt and making sure that this thing is going to go the way it's supposed to, because people have literally died doing that. They've jumped out the back of a moving truck, their feet tap, they get sucked backwards, their head cracked. I mean, there was a Canadian guy who literally died doing that. So a lot of worries going on, a lot of pressure in that situation. Now, cut to about a month or so ago, I was working on the Righteous Gemstones, and it was the same thing. I'm in the back of a truck. It was an SUV this time, driving down the road. The thing hits a bump, the back pops open, I come flying out the back, hit the ground and roll. But I felt no pressure at all when that stunt was happening. It was the same circumstance. I mean, I wanted to make the stunt coordinator look good. All the important people from the show were all standing around. It was all about me. Everybody was looking at me for this thing. But there was nothing. My attention was just simply, I was just thinking about what needed to get done. And that's really the difference, because and truly, if there was such a thing as a pressure situation, coming out the back of a moving truck while everybody's staring at you, that's gotta qualify. But it did in one situation, it didn't in the other. And that begs the question, well, how come? And the answer I came up with was, it was where my attention was, specifically the fact that I was focused on not only the outcome, screwing up or getting it right, whatever, but the consequences of that outcome. So when I was thinking about, well, if I screw this up, then this other bad stuff is going to happen, that creates pressure. That creates a situation that now becomes a threat. And in that threat perception, my sympathetic nervous system kicks in, my avoidance system in my brain kicks in, and I feel a lot of anxiety and stress and pressure. Whereas if I'm focused on the moment, if I'm just present in the now, then I can pay attention to those things that I need to do in order to set conditions for success to be most likely to happen. In other words, if I want to do well, whatever well is in our performance situations, if I want to do well, there are certain actions I need to take, certain things I need to do, certain ways I need to be. I have to identify those and then be present to engage in them, because otherwise my attention's in the future, and the future's imaginary. It's not real. What's real is right now. Now, what I do in this moment, that's what's going to affect the future. Now, I might have a good idea about what the future is going to look like. Again, coming back to those probabilities we were discussing earlier, might be a high probability that I'm accurate in my assessment of what the future will be. But the ultimate reality is that the future doesn't exist. It's still an imagination in my mind. And so my attention being on that imagination does me no good. Where my attention has to be is on the things right now that I can do to manifest that outcome that I want. And that's really where my whole thing with pressure lays. So I started thinking, all right, well, some of the myths that I've heard, one, I've already said, pressure's inevitable. We can't avoid it. Well, you know what? We can avoid it. We can avoid it by paying attention to the now, because anybody, literally anybody who has ever been in any kind of performance situation and just felt, it goes by a lot of names, it goes by flow or in the zone. I call it the bubble, but literally anybody who's been in that situation knows pressure doesn't live there. It's like everything's just hitting on all cylinders and it's just moving of its own accord. And you're just kind of riding that wave in that moment. There is no future. There is no past. There's just the now. Everybody's experienced that. Pressure cannot live in that moment. So by turning our attention to the moment, we eliminate pressure. So pressure is not inevitable. The other thing is that, again, that the pressure situations that those come up, well, they don't, it's how we view the situation. Now, one thing that's interesting about pressure, though, is that it typically gets talked about in terms of like I just did. I've spent a long time talking about it, where if I screw up, then this is the bad thing that's going to happen, and that creates pressure. Absolutely, it does. But the part that people also they don't think about this part either, but it's equally true. Pressure exists on the flip side as well. Meaning, if I do well,
Hmm.
then all of this great stuff is going to happen. So, for example, in that the VIP stunt I was telling you about with the truck, also in my mind was, if I hit this, if I nail this, all these influential stunt people are going to see it. My ticket is punched. I'm going to
Hmm.
be able to work on some of the biggest shows out there. My career is going to take off. This is going to be the moment when I move from, low level, mediocre day player stunt guy to the guy who goes up on these big shows. Well, that creates a lot of pressure too.
Hmm.
And it creates pressure for the exact same reason. I'm in the future. I'm living in my imagination about possible consequences. That's where pressure lies. It does not lie in the present moment. So again, when I talk to people about pressure, they bring up pressure. Another thing that people will push back on this with sometimes is, yeah, but I perform really well under pressure. In fact, I do better under pressure. When
Hmm.
pressure is there, I do better than I normally do. And to that, I would say, I don't know, depending on how much time I would have with them, I might do this in a Socratic style way. But at the end of the day, the point is, I don't know that it's pressure that is helping you perform well. In fact, I think you're performing well in spite of pressure. And I think that the
Hmm.
reason you think pressure is helping you is because you're good at what you do, you've prepared, and you get into the situation. And even though you're nervous and you're anxious and you feel all this pressure, you're still able to execute. And what you've done is do what human beings do, which is pair one thing with the other. I was in this situation and felt a lot of pressure. I did well. Therefore, pressure, it's the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. After it, therefore, because of it. I did
Hmm.
well after the pressure. Therefore, the pressure caused my doing well. So I need pressure. I have to feel pressure in order to do well. That's one part of that. But there is some truth to the fact that when we experience pressure, one thing that does happen is that our sympathetic nervous system activates and we do get this energy boost. And that energy boost is incredibly helpful in a lot of performance situations as long as it's managed. If it's too high, it's not helpful. If it's too low, you're not helpful there either. There's a right amount of energy activation for anything that we do, and pressure can help us get to that place. But there are some way better ways of getting to that right amount of energy activation that don't involve us contemplating and imagining all of the possible bad or good outcomes in the future. In other
Hmm.
words, we can keep our attention grounded where it needs to be in this moment and still generate the energy activation we need for any given performance to go well.
So is this the foundation, Brian, of your Pressure X program?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the whole Pressure X program is built around everything that I just said. The way that I describe it in some of my talks is pressure. It's an illusion. It's not that it's not real. It's an illusion in the sense that if anybody's familiar with the old lady, young lady illusion, where if you look at it one way, it
Oh
looks like an
yeah.
old lady. If you look at it a different way, it's a young lady. But the data don't change. You're still looking at the same lines on the same piece of paper on the same screen. Those don't differ. Just our perspective differs. A similar one is the ducks versus rabbits one. If you look at it one way, it's a duck. If you look at it another way, it's a
Oh
rabbit.
yeah.
But again, it doesn't change. None of the information changes. It's just how we perceive it that
Hmm.
changes. So pressure is real when we perceive situations as threats, or when we perceive situations in a way that, like, as high stakes situations, and our attention is in the future on the consequences. That's when our minds generate this illusion of pressure. But just like any other illusion, if we shift our perspective, we shift our perception and just view the situation differently, number one, as an opportunity, not a threat, and number two, putting our attention in the moment, not in the future, now pressure disappears. It goes away just like any other illusion. So yeah, this idea that pressure is not inevitable, we don't have to accept it as just a given that we have to deal with. That is a huge part of the program, the Pressure X program that you mentioned.
But what ended up happening with the VIP stunt?
Oh, wait, great. I decided, well, one of the things that I teach in the mental skills training is mental imagery. I use it all the time. I think it's one
Hmm.
of the most underutilized tools that's out there for any number of reasons. But in this particular case, I used it for problem solving to work through those issues that I described earlier. And what I came up with in my head was I'm going to do a backflip out the back of the truck, because what that does is it puts
Wow.
me into a position where I'm facing the direction the truck is driving, which is going to be the direction that I end up ultimately going. With the backflip, I finish the backflip, I can tap my feet and go straight into a roll the same way I would normally do if I were jumping that direction, as opposed to trying to figure out going another way and then twisting my body. It was all awkward. So that's what I did, and it went great. Did the backflip, hit the ground, rolled. Now, there was another guy. This is a different part of the story that has other whatevers, but there was another guy who came out of the truck after me. There were two of us that were doing this fight that we hear in the truck. So I came out first, hit the ground, rolled. The other guy came out, hit the ground, and he just stuck there. And the
Ugh.
truck kept on going. Motorcycle that was chasing the truck took off. They called cut, and this guy didn't get up. And I was closest one to him. So I got up and I ran over to him, and he had blood pooling under his head, and I mean, he wasn't
Ugh.
moving. And I was calling his name, and I went over to touch him, and he started. Then he kind of started to wake up, but he started to move and started to get up, and I pushed him down to hold him down to immobilize him. And then by then the medic had come over, and they called an ambulance, and he went away in an ambulance that day. Ended up okay. He got evaluated at the hospital. He went home that night. But and again, I have no way of knowing how he prepared for that particular stunt. But for me, I really credit my walking away from that one, as well as many others. One that's coming up tomorrow, as a matter of fact, on another show. I credit this to that mental imagery, to being able to see and not more than see, to experience how these things are going to happen and try out different strategies, because you can't rehearse stuff like that. You
Hmm.
just have to figure it out in your mind. And for me, that was the strategy that I did. So I did the backflip, having used the mental imagery to work it out, and it all worked out great for me.
Hmm. Fascinating take on pressure. So, is potential real?
Potential. That's an that's an interesting one too. I go back and forth around potential. I I wrote a book called Begin Again: Utilize the Wisdom of Eastern and Western Ideologies to Achieve Your Full Potential. And that's another word that just gets thrown around like everybody just knows what it is. We all have a potential. But to me, I'm wondering more and more these days if potential is even a useful term,
Hmm.
because some of this is going to get kind of crazily philosophical, but some of it's just straightforward and everybody can understand. At any given moment, we're only capable of our best.
Hmm.
That's all we can do. We can't do better than our best. And in any given moment, our best will change. It'll change based on how much sleep I had, or whether I'm hungry or not hungry, or how much, whether I've exercised or stretched or not, or, those are all physical things, but it may change based on what I have going on in my life and the level of distraction that I have happening in my head. So at any given moment, my best, and that's what we typically refer to as our potential, like living up to our potential, we are
Hmm.
performing to the best of our possible abilities. Well, those possible abilities shift day to day, minute to minute. So is potential something that it is a fleeting momentary thing? In other words, is my potential right now different from what it was 10 minutes ago? I
Hmm.
think there a very good case could be made for that. Or is there some almost platonic version of potential, meaning like Plato, he wrote about forms, and this idea of there being a perfect form. That triangle gets used a lot. Like there's such a thing as a perfect triangle, but it never exists, or is ever found in any kind of form on Earth. But this form exists in the ideas of the world. There's this form, this perfection that's there. So is potential that? Is it this ideal perfection that we, I don't know, possibly in this ideal way could achieve, but never will because it's just not possible on Earth? Is that another way to think about it? And if so, what's the use of that? If if I can't get there, then what's the use of thinking about it that way? What's real? And this is where Plato and Aristotle went back and forth. Around Plato's up in the clouds, and Aristotle's like, nah, let's talk about the earth, what's happening in reality right now.
Mm.
So so that's where I'm at with potential. I think again, it's one of those terms that gets thrown around like everybody knows what it is, and it's a thing that's actually objectively real. But I don't know that if it is objectively real, I think it's changing second to second.
Hmm.
And if it's not objectively real, in other words, if it's this idealistic state of what we imagine we could, under the perfect circumstances, achieve, I don't know that that's really useful for anybody either. So that's where I'm at with potential.
Hmm. So it's a fluid, variable state for you, but your fear is that it raises kind of false expectations.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think that it is always good for us to pursue our best,
Hmm.
to in any given moment to try to create conditions that allow us to be at our best. Now, there will always be variables at play that we have no control over that will also influence our performance in those situations, and and we just have to acknowledge that that's the case. But I think that it's always right, no matter what it is that we're doing, to do the best that we can do. I mean, that's a message that's just a value that I hold. That's a message I try to teach my kids, is this idea of it doesn't matter whether you're at practice or if you're at the Super Bowl, you go out and you do the best you can do.
Hmm.
And that's just how that is. Now, the best we can do, though, like we were just talking about with potential, changes. It changes day to day.
Yeah.
How much recovery time have we had? All the things, maybe we just broke up with a significant other, and there's
Hmm.
just an emotional state that's not conducive to, but that's my reality. That is my reality, like right now. And my reality, this gets into acceptance, which is a big part of, I believe, resilience. I think that it's a necessity for resilience, this
Hmm.
idea that right now, in this current moment, my situation is the way it is. How is it? Well, we can break that down into, and I do when I work with my clients, physical, mental, emotional, social. So, physically, what's going on right now? Mentally, what's happening in my mind? How am I perceiving these situations? Emotionally, what emotions am I experiencing? And from where are they being generated? And socially, what's going on with my relationships with other people? Are they strong? Are they not? Am I talking to them? Am I not? So, in any given moment, we have to accept things as they are. And because how they are is going to ultimately determine what's possible and what isn't possible.
Hmm.
So what happens a lot of times when we don't accept, when in other words, an alternative might be to just ignore part of reality that we don't like, or try to gloss it over, rationalize it, try to tell ourselves a different story about what is than what actually is. All that does is send us in some directions that tend to be counterproductive
Hmm.
and less helpful toward achieving what we're trying to achieve. So yeah, I mean, for me, like I said, I haven't landed on, okay, here's my 10-second, whatever on potential. I'm still working through it in my own head, but I do believe that when we start talking about potential from the standpoint of, for example, a coach telling an athlete, you know what, you're not reaching your potential. Well, how does that coach know what that athlete's potential is? The coach doesn't know, and the athlete doesn't know. But
Hmm.
what that does, especially if the athlete has been trying his or her best, same thing with bosses. I see so much potential in you. When are you going to live up to your potential? What does that even mean? What is
Hmm.
live? If I were to live up to my potential, what would you see different? Because I think I'm putting in all the effort that I can. Am I
Hmm.
perfect? No. Am I making mistakes? Sure. Am I learning? Am I a journey? Am I a work in progress? Absolutely, I am. But isn't that part of fulfilling our potential? Is living out those moments and responding to them well, too? I mean, I don't know. I think that when we judge people or when we put that out about potential, it can be demoralizing in a lot of ways, particularly if
Hmm.
somebody truly does believe that they've put forth their full effort. They've prepared, they went in, they did the best they could. Again, they weren't perfect. They made some mistakes. They can certainly get better. But I mean, can't we all get better? And again, if reaching our potential means that we can no longer get better, like that's the end state. Well, now we're back in Plato's world of,
Hmm.
well, that's not even real. We can't ever get there. So why are we so worried about pursuing it, and why are we beating ourselves up when we don't? Let's accept what is and live in reality.
You mentioned your book, Begin Again, and you're taking on a very hard, difficult task of blending Eastern and Western ideologies there. What do you want the reader to come away with, Brian?
Well, I I don't know that I accept the premise that it's a really hard thing to blend the Eastern and
Hmm.
Western ideologies. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the title the way that I did, because the genesis of that book, here's how that whole thing started. Was I was going through a really tough time in my own life, and one of the coping mechanisms that I was using then and still use to this day is I got up in the morning very, very early before the rest of the world started, or at least most of the rest of the world. And I had a stack of books. Now I would go do some stretching and exercising stuff, and then I would sit down and I would read these books. And they were, some of them I mentioned already. There were some of the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca. I've read almost all of his stuff. Plato. Um, I read the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu, the Upanishads, just different wisdom books. That was the whole point. The books that I thought that I could glean some wisdom from,
Hmm.
that were thousands of years old, or a decade old. Ryan
Hmm.
Holiday's written some great books. He's a modern day through a Stoic lens. Sam Harris has some great books. There are some modern people as well who really they've put out some great ideas that I could take some knowledge from. And that was the point. And I would read a little bit from each book. And when something I read resonated with me on whatever level, for whatever reason, I wrote it down on a sticky note. I wrote down what it was, what the quote was from the work, and then what that quote meant to me, like
Hmm.
why it struck a chord with me, and how I thought it might be beneficial for other people. And that was just on a sticky note. And those accumulated. And then I wrote about it. So each of what the book is it's a series of 183 essays that are that all came from those sticky notes. And the structure is this: it's, here's a challenge that many of us face. Here's some information around that challenge. And then here are some tangible, real world applications that you can go try out today and probably see some benefit from. Now, some of the things that I recommend in that book, in those different sections, are things that do take time, because you know just like physical skills that we once upon a time didn't have, but then we learned them and we practiced them and we gained proficiency, mental skills work the same way. We have to learn them, we have to practice them, and then we become proficient, and then through continued practice we're able to apply them regularly in life,
Hmm.
automatically, the same way that we apply any physical skill. So some of the things in there are recommendations for, why don't you start doing this, and just know it may not take immediately. You might have to try it out a little bit. The example that I use sometimes when this stuff comes up is, depending on the audience, is pool, billiards, shooting pool, and bowling. Because if you're bowling, if you go to a bowling alley and you take a bowling ball and you just start throwing it down the middle of the lane and you get really good at that, you'll probably score in the 140 to 150 range pretty regularly. And that'll be it. You'll top out right around there, but that's pretty darn good. But that's where you'll stop. Now, if you try to do like the pros do and you try to curve the ball in, make it go on the outside and curve back into this one specific spot in the rack, or whatever the thing is called with bowling, um, then you're going to start scoring probably around, I don't know, 20, because the ball is going to go in the gutter, might go in the other lanes every now and then. I mean, there's no telling, but you're not going to
Hmm.
score very well until you keep practicing and you figure it out. And then once you get that curve and you can put that ball into that pocket consistently, now your score is going to go up to 200, 220. You're going to start scoring much higher, much more regularly. But you're going to have to go backward to go forward. Shooting pool is the same way. You can get
Hmm.
really good at shooting pool, making some good balls. If you just hit the cue ball right in the middle and you just use angles to hit the balls, you'll hit 3, 4, maybe even 5 balls in a row regularly. Well, if you learn how to use English, when you first start doing that, English meaning hitting the cue ball at different parts of it to put different spins on it, the ball is going to jump off the table. The cue's going to, you may tear like bad. It looks ridiculous and you feel stupid. And your game's going to go to hell real quick. But if you stick with it and you continue practicing, you will get to the point where you can move the cue ball around the table predictably to wherever you want it to go. And you're going to start running 5, 6, 7 balls in a row consistently. So that's the way mental skills work. There are some that we all have strategies and techniques to deal with challenges when they arise. The idea of mental skills is that we're learning something that we can intentionally and deliberately apply in certain situations to see certain benefit. And when we start doing that, whereas we've just kind of been winging it before, things may go backwards a little bit. We're putting attention on something, we're trying something out, and we may not get the benefit that we want right away. But if you stick with it, you see the benefits. So for me, that's most of the essays in that book are, look, just try this out today. Gain some self-awareness. Accept what is. Try this action out, and maybe you'll see some benefit immediately, but you might not. And if you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Try it again, and then try it again, and then try it again after that. And if after a certain amount of time it's just not working for you, okay, we'll move on to a different thing, because not everything's for everybody. But that was where that book came from. It was really a self-help book for myself. It just came out of my own process for developing me. But one of the other things that really struck me as I was reading these books, as I was going through that process of every morning reading, was how similar some of the ideas were that were written 2,000 years ago to ideas that, were cognitive philosophy or cognitive psychology. I meant ideas that started to emerge in the 50s and the 60s and 70s. The idea that, again, how we're thinking about things is what determines whether they're good or bad. Shakespeare wrote that in Hamlet. Nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So something's, if it's good, great. It's because you're thinking it's good. If it's bad, all right, well, it's because you're thinking it's bad. That's the whole point. It's not the thing itself. It's how you're thinking about it. So these are not new concepts. Right. They've been present throughout millennia, but they show up in the wisdom from thousands of years ago. They show up in some of the books from now. They show up in the scientific research, in the journals that show up in my mailbox regularly. So there really is a very, very strong connection among these different perspectives, be they scientific or philosophical or religious. There's a lot of overlap. And I think that the reason for that is that there's wisdom there. And that's, again, I go back to that word, that idea of wisdom. There have been a lot of really smart, really wise people who have experienced a lot of stuff, and they've written it down, and they've written it down in ways that connect with us even today, whether they were written yesterday or again 2,500 years ago. With some of it, the Tao Te Ching, amazing, just amazing book. This idea of flow, some of the ideas within the Buddhist philosophy of impermanence, that overlaps with Heraclitus, I think you say his name, which no man ever steps in the same river twice, because it's never the same river and he's never the same man. That's Buddhist, but he was Greek, I think. So there's a lot of overlap between the Eastern and Western. And I've always found that, I don't say always, because I haven't always been doing what I do, but since I started reading these books, right, I have found that incredibly interesting, that I'll read about those same concepts and there will just be overlap among these different sources.
Brian, has there been anything in the recent month or so that you changed your mind on?
Let me see what I've changed my mind about. Yeah, but I don't know if we want to get into that. But it's like political in a way. I believe that I think that the state of our country, the United States, is that there are a lot of problems, and that there are a lot of issues on all sides with that. And I think that I have always been a huge proponent of just straight up democracy being the way to go, or at least a republic version of democracy, the way the U.S. has, a representative democracy, the way that the U.S. has set up. And I've thought more over fairly recently, at least since the election too, that a more authoritarian government could be beneficial. Still going around about that in my own head. I don't know. I definitely don't think that Donald Trump's the guy to be doing it. I think that that if an authoritarian government were to work, it would need to be led by somebody who is incredibly value oriented, other oriented, who really has the entire country's best interest at heart and is making every move in that direction. And I only say that the authoritarian part could be helpful because Congress is so dysfunctional
Right.
that things just aren't happening, and they have to happen. If it's a representative democracy, Congress is the main thing, and they have to be functional, and they just aren't. So somebody's got to do it. But I think that person leading the charge just needs to be very value centered and very just very, very clear on the meaning and importance of what it is that they're doing, really taking that role very seriously on behalf of the people that he or she leads. So that's something that I think, again, I'm not full on into, all right, US should go authoritarian for sure. But I'm in the standpoint of, having a little bit more direct control from that executive branch until the legislative branch gets itself together.
Hmm.
It might be a useful thing. So I don't know. Again, it's kind of
Interesting
like
thing to
potential.
struggle about.
Still kicking it around.
Yeah,
I don't know
potential.
where I'll land.
Plenty of potential. It's interesting that, you wrestle with something so big like that. It's a great answer. But I ask that question sometimes, and I'm always amazed at the degree. I had one person say, I've gone from uh, well done hamburgers to medium well, and then I've had some say, well, our politics should be restructured. So it's an interesting spectrum there. So Brian, I started my business in the '90s, and I was working way too hard, not putting myself, my health, in any kind of importance, and uh, I say 14, 15-hour days. I got myself up to 340 pounds. So I'm sitting there in the doctor's office, and she says, if you don't lose the weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. My daughter was just born. So it scared the hell out of me. I'm driving home upset, and spent the next 6, 7 months, lost about 130 pounds and kept it off. You can't, in weight loss, I don't know if you have any struggles here in your past, but you can't look at it as a finishing line. It's lifelong
Yeah.
changes. So I tell people this story, and I could already see it. What's your secret? What'd you do? And there's no secret, Brian. Discipline. That's how I did it. I had willpower, routine, a couple other items, all under what I consider under discipline. And that's how I did it and continue to do it. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life, Brian Hite.
Um, well, sometimes it plays. I wonder the same thing. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't have that one figured out either.
Hmm.
I've achieved a lot, and the way that I've achieved it couldn't have happened without discipline. And I've got my own business that I'm starting up now. So, I mean, you ask about changing my mind. I thought we were going big, so that's where I went. But I
Yeah, I
changed
love
my
it.
mind regularly about the business. I'm like, all right, should I go this route with the coaching, or should I go that route? I'd literally the
Mm.
brand change and the focus on pressure that just happened within the last month. Before that, I was the Renaissance man. I was Renaissance man from the standpoint of multiple jobs and different things that I do for a living, but also from the standpoint of I love creativity. I love innovation. I love thinking about things differently and challenging the status quo, kind of like we were talking about with both potential and pressure. That
Hmm.
questioning the status quo and assumptions that people make is something I really enjoy. So that was a route that I was going to go, but decided to switch it. So changing my mind happens all the time.
Mm.
It maybe more than it should, maybe not. I don't know. I don't like to be wrong for any longer than I need to be. And so if I'm living life
Mm.
and I realize I get some new information, I have some new experiences that make me think about things differently than I did before, then I want to change. I want to change my perspective to align with my new outlook. I don't want to keep fighting for these rigid archaic beliefs and just drag them around with me. I want to change to whatever makes the most sense. So for me, discipline, it's always been hard. It has been hard for my entire life. I have fought discipline. My parents will attest to that. When I was a kid, if you told me to go left, I would go right, and I'm
Mm.
still that way to a lot of to a lot of degrees. Again, more than I probably should. I don't like to be constrained. I don't like to be controlled, even by myself, and that's what discipline
Hmm.
requires. So for me, really what I've had to gravitate toward, and this comes from, and this is a big part of what I teach in the motivation program that I have, Motivation Blueprint, and all the talks that I give on motivation, is I've had to, physician heal thyself kind of a thing, is take that advice that I give and connect my values to the behaviors that I want. Because no amount of trying to provide rewards for myself or for anybody else, or punishments for myself or anybody else, is going to create the sustained drive that's necessary to make it through those tough days and
Hmm.
make it through those times when you just simply, you can't even imagine yourself working through whatever it is that's going on. If the values are first and foremost in our minds and we keep them present in whatever ways that we do, and there are many, and there are some creative ways that we can do that. A vision board is one of them. I mean, if anybody knows what a vision board is, it's one of those things where you have a big poster board and you just have a bunch of pictures of what it is that you want. Now, I think it's used wrong. I think that people use it as, okay, these are all the things that I want, and if I just look at them enough, then they're just going to manifest in my life. And I don't think it works that way. It's something where the pictures shouldn't be of what you want in terms of material things, or even or I don't know, or even job things, whatever. It should be about the value. How do you want to be? Not what do you want to have, but who do you want to be, and how do you want to be? If I want to be creative, or if I want to be um, engaging, or if I want to be helpful or patient or whatever, these different things that I know that will allow me to, if I want to be consistent, whatever those things are, I need to identify them for myself, because this is how I'm defining me. These are the things that I want to make up me at my core. If I define what those are, and then I remind myself regularly, again, if you just get a picture that reminds yourself of consistency or of patience, then that's when it becomes maximally beneficial. Because again, it's no magic's going to happen. If you put up a picture of a boat, you're not just going to automatically get a boat in your backyard. That's not the way it works. Now, that boat might remind you, oh yeah, I want a boat, so that means that I need to do this, and then I need to not do this, and then I
Hmm.
don't. It can remind you of those things, and whatever, it can serve a purpose for that reason. But for me, that particular method has been useful from the standpoint of reminding myself of values. And that's one of the things I suggest to my clients, because if we can keep those values, why we're doing what we're doing, in the forefront of our mind, man, we can make it through some of those really challenging moments that may have grounded us in the past.
Hmm. Hmm. What motivates you, Brian?
Depends on what we're talking about. For me, in terms of, uh, well, I'll go bigger. So it doesn't really depend on what the situation is. What motivates me is growth,
Hmm.
is learning, is improvement. And those take many, many forms. It can be physical improvement through working out. It can be mental improvement through practicing meditation or reading a book. It can be social improvement through learning from interactions with my spouse, my kids. It can take a lot of different forms, but that idea of improving, of trying to learn from and move forward from whatever it is that's going on, that's really a big driver for me. Um, and I'd say that again, it permeates all my professional and personal life, whether it's interpersonal with other people or even just me.
Hmm.
My one of the things that in terms of hobbies, I never had hobbies for a long time. Now I've got a dirt bike that I love to go ride. I do close up card magic. It's another thing I picked up
Really?
during COVID.
Wow.
And again, I don't really do although I did do a magic show for the in-laws at Thanksgiving,
Nice.
but I don't normally do magic for people. It's
Huh.
just something. But I always have I got a deck of cards right here. It's sitting right here in
Wow.
front of me. So I can always. That's part of the improvement
Hmm.
that I have. I want whatever it is that's interesting to me. I want to lean into it, and I want to learn from it, and I want to become better as a result of having interacted with it, whatever that it is.
So given that motivation, how do you measure success?
Mm. I don't know. Yeah, success. That's another. That's where I start with most of my clients is asking that question. Like, what is success to
Hmm.
you? And because many of them have this I want to get a promotion at work, or I want to, if it's in the organizational world or entrepreneurial world, I want to get this profit margin by the next quarter, or whatever it might be. If it's an athlete, I want to win this competition, or I want to get on the podium at this next meet. If it's a performer, it might be, I'm making X amount of money just doing this thing that I'm doing, dancing, doing stunts, acting, whatever that is. So they give me these ideas about what it is that they think success is. And they're things external to themselves. And so we start to
Hmm.
explore, well, but are there other ways to define success? And maybe even some shorter term ways of defining success, because that's another thing, is that some people will get this one fixated thing. They call it a goal, call it whatever you want, but that is what success is. And success doesn't happen until that one thing is achieved. And that's a pretty stressful way to live, because you never get to
Hmm.
experience success except for that one time. And then, because of a concept called the hedonic treadmill, where that refers to the idea of, all right, we get what we want. I've set this goal. I now achieved that goal, and I feel great about it for a little bit. And then I don't anymore. I habituate right back to the same emotional state that I had before. And now I've set a new goal, and now I'm unhappy again because I don't have it. So I have to pursue it. So for me, success is, it's not a thing. It's kind of, I evaluate success in terms of the extent to which I've lived out those values that I mentioned before. So
Hmm.
for me, success is I can evaluate my success at any moment. Now, I typically will in the evenings, and I typically will in the mornings too. I'll look back in the mornings on the previous day, or I'll think about, okay, so here are the things that I have going on today. What might success look like? Again, less about achieving, more about the process of how I'm approaching life and the things that I'm dealing with. So if it's a weekend and we've got multiple soccer games going on, we're traveling from here to there to whatever, and we've still got all, how am I going to handle that in a way that I can define as successful? And when I'm working with clients, a way that I introduce this process is physical, mental, emotional, social. So again, the ideas of what what are some ways that you might be able to define success for yourself? This is before we get into the big value thing, because that's kind of a long leap for people. This is more, okay, so physically, how might you define success? Well, when I lose 50 pounds. Okay, but what do you need to do in order to lose 50 pounds?
Hmm.
Well, I need to take in fewer calories today than I burned. Great. All right, well, let's call that success. Now you can evaluate it on the day. If it's mental, what is success? Well, it's recognizing very quickly when, and again, this is a something that can happen every single day in the moment. Recognizing quickly when I'm turning from optimism to pessimism, when I'm starting to
Hmm.
fixate on the potential negatives, when I'm perceiving a situation as a threat rather than an opportunity, to pick that up very quickly, that my perceptions and my thought process are counterproductive, and then to switch them around in a more to a more productive direction. Recognizing, and this is, again, I just want to pause here on this point for a second, because this is where this hangs up a lot of people too. So I've
Hmm.
been thinking about this situation. This is bad. This is a problem. It's whatever. And so this guy's telling me I need to think about it as a good thing. And yes, that is what I'm telling you. But I'm not trying to say that's the only way, that if something's a problem, that you can just magically turn it into a not a problem
Hmm.
by thinking about it differently. But we can, even in those situations that are hard situations for us. For example, maybe somebody loses their job, or, for me, I went through this twice, gets a divorce. How that was incredibly painful. And I would absolutely define it as a bad thing in that situation. I did define it as a very bad thing. But now when I look back on it, I recognize, well, that was an incredibly good thing that happened, because it opened up other opportunities. It
Hmm.
it changed the way that I interacted with the world. It it changed my priorities and the different things that I thought were important and just all the things. And now I have a fiance and I have, two stepsons, and it's just none of that would have been possible if I'd have stayed where I was in this
Mm,
marriage that clearly wasn't working. I was trying to gloss it over. I was trying to ignore it. When the marriage finally ended, I was devastated and again defined as very bad. But even in those moments, we can turn this around. What good can come out of this? Well, I'm practicing some resilient skills that can absolutely help me down the line. The This has opened my eyes to some problems, to some challenges that I didn't know existed, and now that I do, I can take steps to if not eliminate them, at least minimize them,
mm,
and have them affect my life differently. So I really want to make that point because it at this point people will start rolling their eyes, at least some of them, like, okay, he's trying to tell me just turn my bad thoughts good.
mm,
Sort of, but yeah, it's opportunity versus threat. If I keep thinking about this thing as something that might harm me, something bad, something that I should avoid, then I'm going to react one way. Whereas if I think about it as an opportunity to create change. Why? Because I recognize it is wrong. This sucks and I want to change it. That's an opportunity for me to make my
mm.
life better. How is that bad? I now have that knowledge and can create that experience. And so that's where I go with that. It's like another way I conceptualize it is, are we trying to win or are we trying to avoid losing?
Hmm.
That's another way of thinking about it. If we recognize that we're trying to avoid losing, we tend to be very protective and we tend to be very
Yeah,
avoidant and we tend to
cautious.
hide and we don't put ourselves out there, and we don't do what's necessary to improve. In order to improve, we have to come outside our comfort zone. When we're trying not to lose, we are doing everything possible to stay within our comfort zone. So improvement's not possible. So anyway, all that to say that when we're talking about success, we can think about it in terms of physical, mental, emotional, and social, and we can define throughout each day some different things that we can think of as success. And then ultimately, like I said, the ultimate way of defining success, I believe, because this ties into the motivation, it ties into well being, and really a solid understanding of who we are and what direction we're going. What really matters is success is to what extent did we live up to the values that we've set for ourselves. And again, like Plato's forms and the potential we talked about, we're never going to get there. We're never going to be perfect. So we can't define success in terms of perfection, but we can define success in terms of did we meet a standard, or did we do better than yesterday? Or if we thought we did really well yesterday, did we do at least as well as we did yesterday? So we can define success in terms of how well we ourselves have dealt with things in the past.
Brian, I am very impressed with you. I love your work. I love what you do. I'm so glad we set this up. If anybody's listening, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I'll tell you, if anything that I've said resonates with anybody in the audience, for example, if you've ever dealt with high stakes situations and really felt a lot of pressure during them, and that's been detrimental for you, or if you struggled with either motivating yourself or those you lead, or if you've just been in performance situations and felt overwhelmed by how to prepare and what to do, and you don't have a mentor to help walk you through those things step by step, I strongly encourage you, go to my website. It's brianhiteglobal.com, BrianHite global.com, and just check out some of the programs that are there and what it is that I offer and see if something resonates for you. And if it does, reach out to me via email, brian@brianhiteglobal.com, or you can schedule a discovery call right there on the website. And I'm happy to talk to you because these things are tough and they do limit us. And it is a rough place to be when we find ourselves in circumstances where we know more is possible, but we just don't know how to get there. I've been there. I don't know who hasn't. And it is a rough place to be if you don't have somebody there to help you out. So again, if some of this has resonated with you, please contact me. You can also find me on Facebook and LinkedIn and on Instagram, Brian_Hite23. So those are some other ways. I'm not a big social media person, but if you do reach out via email or on the website, I will 100% get back to you and we can discuss whatever's going on. And if you mention the fact that you heard me on the podcast, I'll give you 35% off too of whatever
Nice.
it is that you have. All you got to do is just say that you heard me on the podcast, and There it is. You get that. But whether whether you get a program or you don't get a program, I'm still happy to have the conversation with you because again, it is they're just challenging places to be, and a huge reason why I do what I do is because I've been where many people are. I've been through very, very dark times in terms of all of those areas, pressure
Mm.
situations, high stakes situations in which I felt pressure,
Mm.
motivation problems, and just complete overwhelm in terms of where to start with these big performance environments. So anyway, that's where you can find me, and I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Brian Hite, Global, HITE. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes. Brian, thank you so much for your time. Next time I'm in Nashville, we'll get together and have a cup of tea.
I love it. I love it. That'd be great. Come find me, reach out, and we will definitely do it. We'd love to meet up in person.
You be well.
All right. Take care. You too.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.